So good morning and good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us on this session of the ICPD talk today on demographic diversity and sustainable development. I'm Priscilla Idele, the Chief of Population and Development Branch at UNFPA in New York. I'll be moderating the session today. Before we get started, let's just take a few housekeeping announcements. This event is being recorded, so whatever we say here will stay with us. Secondly, accessibility provided in this session includes simultaneous interpretation in Spanish and French. To activate interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and then select the language of your preference. And kindly take a few minutes seconds to enable the language of your choice in the language options, again at the bottom of your screen. It will take just a few seconds. There will be an option to mute original audio. Please do not select this option. If you do, you will miss some parts of the audio. And if you have any questions or comments, please share them on the chat box. We have a dedicated Q&A session where we will address your questions. And without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome the Deputy Executive Director for Programs at UNFPA, Diana Keita, to provide opening remarks and to frame today's discussion. Over to you, Diana. And also just to note that Diana, we were told you will stay with us as long as possible, but you have also another concurrent commitment that may take you away before the end. So we appreciate you joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. Thank you, colleagues, dear partners, friends, colleagues, esteemed speaker, participant, panelists of this ICPD talk series. Very happy and glad to be with you all this morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. It is my distinct honor to welcome you all to the 4th ICPD talk as part of the Let's Talk series launched this year as an humble effort to engage and stimulate dialogue with our civil society partners around the 30 years anniversary of the ICPD agenda. Today, ICPD talk will reflect on the ICPD Global Dialogue on Demographic Diversity and Sustainable Development, which seems distant now that we are approaching the last of the 3 ICPD Global Dialogue, but was just a month ago in Dhaka, Bangladesh. It is wonderful to see those who were present in Dhaka participating in today's conversation. But this is also an opportunity to share key insight and engage in a conversation other partners who were not able to travel to Bangladesh. We are keen to hear your question, reflection, and solution for us to collectively propel the ICPD agenda forward and leave no one behind, especially that translation is available, because demography is important, but cannot be done only in English, for sure. So thank you for that. To help recap, especially for those who were not present, the Global Dialogue brought together a wide array of partners to discuss the challenges and explore the opportunities of the world shifting demographics. It was a remarkable event where we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the ICPD Program of Action, a landmark agreement that recognizes the interconnectedness of population, development, reproductive health, and human rights, but most importantly, understood how demography unites us. During the 2 days meeting, it became clear that the world today is very different from 1994, and the unprecedented demographic shift brings opportunity, but a sense of urgency too. As we could discuss in the Global Dialogue, the number of children born or desired has been declining in many parts of the world, particularly in developed countries. Factors contributing to this decline include increased access to education, especially for women and girls, use of contraception, changing societal norms and economic pressures, and labor force participation. As birth rate decline and life expectancy increases, Many countries are experiencing an aging population. The increasing proportion of elderly individuals aged 65 and older in the population is leading to concern about healthcare and pension system. At the same time, high population growth will continue to shape the demographic future of sub-Saharan Africa, requiring increased investments to provide public access to essential goods and services, including sexual and reproductive health, but also providing opportunity to reap the benefits of the demographic dividend if large youthful populations are assured quality education, health, and employment. But as I said earlier, the demographic dividend for healthy aging is as important. The global dialogue delved into a range of pressing issues, including equitable access to healthcare, education, employment across diverse demographic groups. A key common denominator that came across is that countries are becoming more ethnically and culturally diverse due to migration and globalization. This diversity is often perceived as a challenge for social cohesion and national identities. But migration also provides opportunities as a driver of economic development and possible policy solutions to help mitigate the challenges of rapid demographic decline and aging. Interaction with other megatrends such as rapid urbanization, climate change, technological advancement have wide-range implications for economies, societies, and government worldwide, shaping policy and priorities in areas such as healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social welfare. We know, for example, that the burden of climate risk falls disproportionately on the poor, women, and marginalized community who lack the necessary capacity and resources to adapt to climate hazard and to cope with resulting impacts. Today, we have an opportunity to take forward the discussion that was initiated in Dhaka, reaffirming the need to embrace this diversity as not merely a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity for achieving inclusive and sustainable development goals. The transformative vision of the ICPD Program of Action in placing individuals' rights and choices at the center of development strategy, which inspired government and individuals to plan their future, and the ICPD 30th anniversary is critical, but we need to go beyond the 30th anniversary and continue strategizing on ways to position these themes in broad multilateral processes. The interconnection between population dynamics and sustainable development goals, including poverty reduction, sexual and reproductive health, education, gender equality, and environmental sustainability should not be underestimated. Sustainable development cannot be achieved in isolation. It requires a collective effort involving government, civil society, the private sector, academia, and community at large. The vision and principle of ICPD Program of Action continue to inspire development priorities worldwide. The core tenets of that program of action, that sexual and reproductive health and rights and women's equality are absolute preconditions for sustainable development, and that development must be based on universal human rights, non-discrimination, and inclusive opportunity for people to live and thrive are as relevant today as they were in 1994. It is our goal, dear partner, to assure that these principles are manifest in the complex new world of 2024 and beyond. To do this, we need dialogues, and we need thinking how we advance these principles as we navigate powerful new headwinds and megatrends. This talk today is intended to continue to explore how we can engage thoughtfully and act decisively to chart a course towards a future where inequalities are eradicated and the principles of sustainable development guide our collective endeavor. Together, we can create a future where everyone has the knowledge, resources, and autonomy to make informed decisions about their bodies and lives. I look forward to the upcoming discussion with our esteemed panelists and later to hearing your question during the question and answer segment on this critical topic. I thank you for your kind attention. Priscilla, unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Thank you so much, Dee, for those insightful remarks, which frame very well the discussion that we are about to take on now. May I now take the opportunity to introduce our three esteemed speakers. We have Professor Thomas Sobotka, who is the Deputy Director and the lead of the research group on fertility and family at the Venia Institute of Demography. Then we have Dr. Apuva Jadhav. She's the senior demographer and statistician at the Office of Population and Reproductive Health in the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Last but not least is Professor Ayman Zori. He's the founding president of the Egyptian Society for Migration Studies and an adjunct professor at the American University in Cairo. Welcome to you all, thank you for joining us today. So I'll pose a few questions to each of our speakers, and then, as I mentioned earlier, we shall have a session for a Q&A. So the first question is to you, Thomas. Thank you again for joining us today. As you know, and this is part of your research, fertility decline is increasingly a global phenomenon now. Some countries are experiencing unprecedented low fertility rates, and they are trying to adopt family-friendly or explicitly pro-natalist policies to reverse these trends. Based on your research, what are some of the main causes of this low fertility, and what policies and why do policies aimed at raising fertility often fail to achieve their intended goal? What are some of the more effective policy solutions to respond to these demographic changes? I know that is a mouthful of questions, but I'm sure you'll be able to succinctly address each of them. You have 4 minutes for that. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Priscilla. It's a pleasure to be on board of this session. And yes, indeed, 3 questions in one, so let's see how I deal with them. Low fertility has become a global phenomenon already. More than half of global population, perhaps close to 60%, live in low fertility countries today, with total fertility rates below 2. And we have seen a number of surprises in the last 15 years, including a widening phenomenon of extreme low fertility rates, with the total fertility rates around 1 or lower, reported today in countries like the Republic of Korea or in China. We have seen unexpected fertility declines in rich countries with relatively higher levels of fertility, such as the Nordic countries or the United States. And we have seen many middle-income countries experiencing rapid fertility falls, especially among young women, in the past 10-15 years. This includes countries like Uruguay, Chile, Mexico, Turkey, Iran, Thailand, Bangladesh. There is, however, not a single driving force behind this trend, and the factors behind low or extreme low fertility rates differ between countries. What's known, however, from the ongoing research is many of these changes and shifts boil down to the changing lives and perspectives of younger people. They face new economic pressures and uncertainties. Some of them are period-related, such as the surging inflation after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in many countries, unstable employment, dual labor market, stagnating relative incomes, and in many rich countries, young people are struggling to keep up with the housing prices. We also know that there are changing patterns of partnership and intimate behaviors among young adults, with the consequence of partnership formation and family formation being increasingly shifted towards later time in life. This, in combination with more reliable contraception being available and being used across many countries globally. There are also widening gaps among women and men, or between women and men, in education, lifestyle, partnering preferences, which can make it difficult for some young people to find partners. We know there are young people are expressing changes in their reproductive preferences. They desire to have fewer kids, but they are also keeping options more open. In many countries, they are uncertain whether they plan to have kids in the future and how many of them they would like to have if they plan to have kids. We know that there are, of course, new crises and uncertainties which are affecting especially the young people, including the climate change, and in the recent years, it was the impact of the COVID pandemic and inflation, which I mentioned. And we know for some countries like East Asian societies that young people face a lot of pressures and gender inequalities, both in the labor market and at home, which leads to childlessness and singlehood among many young people, especially women. Now, why do policies fail to address these things? In a very high-speed way, I try to single out several factors, 4 factors. First, kids are really expensive. And typical policies when government increase a little bit of financial incentives or baby bonuses or increase a little bit the monies provided to families are far not enough to change the picture. Second, money alone cannot fix the problem. Good policies require a broad-based package that includes good childcare, good parental leave policies, employment and labor market policies, and a lot of flexibility for parents. Third, many countries have not been able to address institutional failures, the issues which include their labor market system and how it works, gender inequalities, but also conflicts. Fourth, there are many reasons for not having additional kids that cannot be addressed by policies. People face health issues, they don't find the right partner, they face economic pressures, and they postpone childbearing as a result. I think I keep the discussion of more effective policy solutions towards the later part of our session or to other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for outlining, first giving us the overview of the status of fertility today in some of most parts of the world that are experiencing low fertility levels, but also outlining some of the causes of this, such as the economic barriers, unemployment, gender inequalities, unprecedented uncertainties that young people are facing today, and of course, some of the effects of COVID and so on. But you have also outlined some of the failures that money alone, I like that, money alone cannot fix the problem. There's more to it, such as social, economic, and political issues that people have to contend with. So we shall come back to it, but I have another question for you. How can we bridge the gap between population data, research, and policy, given all that we know that you have outlined? What are some of the concrete actions that should be taken to translate demographic research and analysis into evidence-based and human-centered policy actions?
Thank you, Priscilla. That's another tough question because we are really having different countries. And in some countries, we have a lot of data and we know a lot, of course, of what's going on. So let me just flesh out a few things. We need to better understand how reproductive ideals and intentions are changing among the younger generations and what kind of main obstacles they face in realizing their fertility plans if they have them, so that policies can really support things which matter for them and are not based on policymakers or politicians' perceptions of what matters. We need to better understand the constraints young adults are facing when forming partnership and families. And I think one of the potentially underappreciated research issues is housing availability, housing prices, housing affordability. In many rich countries, middle-income countries, young people feel they cannot achieve this to form a family. We need to understand better the drivers of delayed reproduction and delayed partnerships and parenthood, which calls for more life course research perspective in looking at our data. And also, this should inform policies which work across the life courses of people, because kids are now living often with their parents until they graduate from the university, until their mid-20s, in some countries even longer. And that really means we need a more holistic perspective about data and policy interventions.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, excellent suggestions there. I think you have really laid out that we shouldn't assume what young people need. We should understand their aspirations and also their concerns, especially when it comes to affordability of having a family, including housing and other consequences such as education and care. But also the fact that we need to understand what delayed parenthood means and how we can bring in the policies that cut across the life course and not just those that are focused on the now and the then. I think excellent points there that you have raised, and you are right on time. So thank you for that as well. Now I'll move on to Dr. Apuva. Dr. Apuva, USAID has recently launched the strategic framework called Pathways to Progress for sexual and reproductive health, which is guiding family planning and reproductive health program interventions until 2030, with a geographic focus on sub-Saharan Africa and other high fertility contexts. Could you tell us what are the key elements of the integrated approach to sexual and reproductive health interventions amidst demographic changes and other intersecting megatrends that we should be paying attention to? Over to you, Dr. Jadhav.
Sure. Thank you so much, Priscilla, and greetings to everybody. Actually, what I will say is not so different, even though the context may seem different from what Tomas has described. They're actually, some of the issues are still very pertinent. So I think understanding what an integrated and supportive approach to SRH interventions should look like must start with understanding demographic change first and foremost. And, through a very careful, data-driven and collaborative approach at USAID, we created the strategic framework that you referred to, and it really represents an evolution of our FPRH program through a new approach that is strategically designed to better address needs and identify issues and opportunities, which really resonate with the conversations that are front and center as we reflect on ICPD+30. There's kind of 4 core themes that I'd like to highlight before jumping into answering your question more directly. First, responding to the needs of a growing reproductive age population, that too with a flat budget is one core challenge. And then recognizing and responding to the needs of the largest generation of youth in history is something that also is central to this. Both of these things are clearly informed by historical and future population trends, owing in a large part to population momentum in many of the countries where we work. And next, addressing the impact of climate change and reducing poverty and supporting inclusive economic development is also informed by an understanding of the intersection of megatrends that shape demographic trends worldwide. And from the perspective of identifying, frankly, what is USAID's comparative advantage as a development agency versus an agency or organization that takes a sector-specific approach. So in my mind, there are 3 key elements of this integrated approach to SRH interventions amidst demographic changes and megatrends. The first shouldn't surprise anybody, but it's lead with data. In order to ensure that FPRH resources are reaching countries and populations that need them the most, we use data, so much data, to identify and then stratify our countries based on need. We use indicators ranging from those that we typically use in our field of family planning, but also included those that reflect broader socioeconomic, sociodemographic, and megatrends. These included measures of equity, environmental contexts, magnitude, and so much more. So we've expanded our list of countries to 41 priority countries, and they're not just focused on high fertility or sub-Saharan African contexts, actually, but take a closer look at where resources for family planning and reproductive health may be maximized globally in an era where donor support is declining, national budgets of partner countries are strained, and the cohort of women of reproductive age is increasing. And so those in this kind of high need category have high levels of early childbearing, close birth intervals, large disparities in access to services by different population subgroups, and major environmental degradation threats. Those then in the middle tier, or strategic support countries that we're calling it, are in Asia, Middle East, North Africa, as well as Sub-Saharan Africa. And they require targeted financial and technical support to accelerate their progress and move toward more resilient FPRH program that's characterized by country-led financing, policy and regulatory reform, strong local institutions, among others. And finally, there are those that are in the transition country category. And these are countries that have reached replacement level or already at below replacement level. And that'll be gradually phased out of bilateral FPRH technical and commodity assistance over to local partners and stakeholders over time, having met those kind of basic screening criteria, at least at the national level. We all know that we have to look closely at subnational data to really understand the complex dynamics of what's happening within countries, right? Okay, second, ensure a multi-dimensional and multi-level approach to SRH programming. Within this pathways framework, we support 3 rights-based pathways that collectively operate at individual, health systems, and then societal levels. So the individual level, ensuring that individuals have accurate information, skills, ability to take action, and to achieve the highest attainable levels of SRH across their lifetimes. So again, hearkening back to what Tomas was saying, taking a life course perspective. The second pathway is at the health systems level to ensure that they provide quality, accessible, and people-centered reproductive, sexual and reproductive health care. And finally, the third pathway is at the societal level, understanding that local communities, organizations, institutions, and governments create and foster social norms and policies that support individuals to make and act on their SRH decisions, free from violence, coercion, and discrimination. Each of these pathways is greater than the sum of its parts. It really ensures that our program works with partner countries to realize a world where ongoing improvements to sexual and reproductive health do contribute to longer, healthier, and more prosperous lives for all. And if I may take just one more minute, the third one is to be nimble, change course unexpectedly. Polycrises and intersecting megatrends all play a role in shifting the demographic trends that we look at, sometimes seemingly at the drop of a hat. COVID showed us this, right, with mortality and life expectancy changes dramatically in some countries, and how we had to swoop in and adapt quickly, with demographers playing a key role in understanding the role of age in mortality. So as the global community continues to consider emerging evidence on linkages between climate and health, advancing an integrated lens of population and SRHR will remain key in considering effective approaches for gender transformative climate solutions, as Deanne was talking about. And finally, humanitarian emergencies are not just one-off. They're becoming more protracted, blurring the lines between typical donor assistance that's either humanitarian or development, right? We need to think about the role of SRH services in these complex situations, not as one-off solutions, but as an essential part of a package of comprehensive assistance.
Thank you so much, Apuva, for that excellent response. I think I now understand the USAID document much better than I read it before. You've outlined exactly the importance of data and evidence, because without understanding what you need to do, you wouldn't know what you need to do. So that is the beginning point, and that's really important. And of course, taking the multi-level approach that individuals are part of society, they are not just part of themselves. And therefore, we have to acknowledge that, and how do we prepare health systems for that? And the fact that we need to be adaptable and expect the unexpected, as we did with COVID, and figure out how we respond with agility and flexibility that is also quick and fast to act. So thank you so much. I have one more question for you, and this one is about the DHS. USAID has been supporting the demographic and health surveys, which is a critical tool for understanding population needs, as you have rightly outlined, and specifically unmet need for family planning. How is the DHS survey program evolving to address the new data needs in a changing world, and to ensure that the evidence it generates can effectively be used to design human-centered policy interventions? 2 minutes.
A tough question, but absolutely, the DHS has been the gold standard in population health and nutrition indicators for over 40 years, and has been evolving to meet needs every 5 years, right? Just in the last revision, which took place in 2019, 25% of the content in the women's questionnaire was brand new, And that's something that we endeavor to do while also keeping front and center the fact that we can't overload our respondents with questions, even though researchers and policymakers may want that a 3-hour interview is a lot for one woman or a man or the respondent. So the principal audience for these surveys are in-country policymakers and stakeholders, right? As you know, DHS surveys are country-owned, country-led, with country-specific questions also being added along with the core questionnaire that are based on their national development or health plans or priorities in order for that data to be actionable, which is a point that you made. What's interesting is that thus far, we haven't seen that many requests for new data on themes that we are all discussing, population aging or low fertility contexts, even though, as Tomas pointed out, that's a reality in many, kind of global north countries, but certainly also in many DHS countries, right? And so when it comes to your question about the evolution of DHS, it's a little bit of a mixed response. We have tried to respond to the best of our abilities, and hopefully, of course, we'll continue to do so. But some of these central themes are still major gaps in the survey. And maybe this is not the survey for aging data. We have other aging surveys, right? But there is a benefit of being able to link with other demographic and health data and having, say, aging data or information about low fertility contexts as an example. So I do want to point out a few ways that we have adapted. I think UNFPA is leading on working on technology-facilitated gender-based violence. I know USAID and the State Department work closely with UNFPA on these. We've actually piloted new questions in the DHS's domestic violence module to incorporate this changing reality where online harassment and abuse is something that's becoming more widespread, right? And so we have questions in the domestic violence module that are about perpetration of technology-facilitated GBV and more. Second, we're also exploring ways to include data on sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, where legal, safe, and permissible. Improving data collection for these populations is, of course, a cornerstone to achieving the SDGs and is a key step in ensuring that population data are truly counting the experiences of those that are marginalized and vulnerable to ensure that no one's left behind. We have other opt-in modules that reflect the changing priorities of countries and populations in them. We have a mental health module. We have questions on disability. We do have questions on chronic disease. The question then is, how do you go from having these questions in a survey and indicators that come out to acting on them? And I think that's where we struggle a little bit because data use is such an important aspect of much of what we do. However, I think that's a little bit where all of us could do a lot more work. And so given these conversations around ICPD30 and demographic diversity around the world, including in countries with DHSs, I do welcome the opportunity, whether in this forum or outside of it, to consider further still the questions that would be pertinent to the community in the next revision occurring actually later this year. And a lot of the focus will be on many themes that we've talked about, I'm sure.
Excellent, excellent. I'm really excited about the modules that you have already outlined and some of the areas that we are trying to focus on as we move forward. Mental health is a growing issue that we are not currently talking a lot about. And of course, technology-facilitated gender-based violence is an area that we know is contributing also to mental health, ill health, and therefore we need to look at it. Non-communicable diseases and also the disability modules that you have outlined, I think, is to ensure that we leave no one behind as we try to generate data. But your last point about data use is really important, and I think it's something that we shall continue to talk about how we can do this much better than we are doing now. So thank you for that. Professor Zori, now I turn over to you, and I have a few questions for you too. The World Bank's projects that climate change could force more than 200 million people to relocate by 2050 if no urgent action to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions is taken. Is climate change becoming an increasingly prominent driver of population mobility? And if so, how is that? Over to you, Professor Zori.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Priscilla, for the invitation. Actually, when talking about migration, I'm a demographer. So I see migration as one aspect, one important aspect of the trilogy of population dynamics, of course, along with births and deaths. So now we have, in fact, 300 million migrants worldwide, and this number is expected to reach 400 million in 2050. And yes, climate migration is one of the drivers of migration. So climate change is one of the drivers of migration, but actually it is not the sole or the most important driver. For example, we have 120 million inhabitants now are displaced due to conflict and political instability worldwide. Moreover, we have labor migration. It's one of the main drivers of migration, with almost 70% of the population, of the migrant population, are international migrants due to labor migration. For instance, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries host more than 40 million labor migrants. So climate change is an important driver for migration. No one can deny this evidence, this evident fact, especially actually internal migration, and should be included in long-term planning and demographic resilience plans and strategies. So climate change is one of the drivers of migration, should be considered. Should all countries should include the climate change in their plans, especially population plans. I think that's all about climate migration, and also how we regard migration as demographers, as one aspect of the population dynamics.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent response, and outlining that besides climate change, we have increasingly seen mobility being, advanced by instability, conflict, and so on, and acknowledging that those are some of the issues that we have to contend with. Now, following up on that, how can policy approaches to harness the opportunities of demographic changes better leverage the benefits of migration and mitigate climate-induced forced displacements?
Well, actually, as I mentioned before, migration is an important aspect of population dynamics, or I see it as such. It actually must be included and mainstreamed into population policies in all countries. So when talking about migration and mainstreaming population dynamics into development plans, migration must be included in these policies and in mainstreaming the aspects of migration in population plans and in development plans in general. Also, the countries should consider demographic complementarities between countries of demographic surplus and countries of demographic deficits. This is not something theoretical or academic, because this is now became a matter of fact with the high fertility in a few countries and with low fertility in many countries in Europe and in Asia as well. So demographic complementarities between countries should be considered seriously, not theoretically as we've done in the past few decades. Countries need to consider migration as a tool for demographic resilience, same as pro-family and pro-natal policies or the family planning program. So migration also should be considered in in these policies and in the demographic resilience plans for the countries. Actually, the world needs to move from migration politics to migration policies. We fed up of talking about the far right and the hate of migrants and the foreigners and all of these issues that are taken in consideration only in the elections and for political reasons. We need to think about migration as a policy tool, not as a political tool. Actually, migrants are humans, so and their human rights must be observed. This is very important also in dealing with migration. Finally, in this century, in the 21st century, the world will reach its population size, a peak. in maybe in 50 years or so, and the population will start to decrease. Then migration will be the main solution for demographic disparities between countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an important topic. And as I mentioned in the beginning, when we first started, we shall be considering these topics again. I think you have highlighted some key things there. And the most important is that migration should not be politicized, but it should be mainstreamed into policies. I think that is the key takeaway, and humanize migration and make people be part of the solution and not the problem. So thank you so much for that. Now, there are many things that have been highlighted, but because of time, I cannot follow up on some of them. However, I have one last question for all of you, all the speakers. If you could respond to this in 1 minute or so, please provide 1 or 2 key recommendations for UNFPA to consolidate and scale up its work on population and development issues in a demographically diverse world, and specifically given the polarized political environment around key ICPD issues. Feel free to refer to any key areas of UNFPA's work, such as policy and stakeholder engagement, data and analysis, technical support, or advocacy. What should we be scaling up in terms of how we work around these demographic changes? I will start now with Apuva, and then I'll go to Thomas and back to Zori.
In the hot seat. Okay, so there's so much complementarity to the work of UNFPA and USAID, not to mention other development agencies and partner governments. I think the main thing for me is how can we identify key areas in your next strategic plan that looks at niche areas of expertise for synergies and a little bit of a divide and conquer approach to those that are squarely in the mandate of some groups versus others, right? And so within the SRH work of UNFPA, I would suggest a renewed focus on the many topics within the reproductive health umbrella that are not as well funded or researched compared to others. Perimenopause, infertility, low fertility and its implications, reproductive cancers, the impact of climate change on reproductive health, and so much more. You know, we speak a lot about rights-based family planning, and we cannot continue to largely conflate family planning only with contraception and then say we're advancing person-centered care. How can those play a more central role in UNFPA's forward-looking agenda? I would also think about how UNFPA can take advantage of the upcoming reflections on the SDGs in advance of the start of new discussions about indicators and areas of measurement post-2030. I understand that those discussions will commence in a few years, so how will UNFPA shape those conversations? And what will UNFPA suggest is important to focus on to continue to expand and advance SRHR? There is an emphasis right now on measuring success in all of our programming beyond contraceptive use and our usual measures of success. How will the new measures be identified that are identified by researchers work with policymakers in country? How will those be actionable? I would also then identify and encourage concrete ways to robustly connect this agenda to next year's Beijing Plus 30 anniversary, connecting to the anniversary of Women, Peace, and Security agendas. You know, being able to contribute to SRHR linkages using research and data will really help widen audiences to see how connected SRHR is to the rest of the world and how essential it is beyond just reproductive choice. And finally, and I think most close to my heart is, I think it's important to have a similar strategy for UNFPA on population and development, looking forward to 2030 and beyond, that relates to SRH, but really holds its own. The implications, as all of us have discussed, of population dynamics and population change really do go far beyond SRH. So how do we meaningfully consider population, rate of growth, population movement, density, composition, beyond what we typically do to really mean when we say 8 billion lives, infinite possibilities?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I think I can kind of follow up on the previous speakers. We know that restrictive pro-natalist policies don't work, and they don't have any meaningful long-term sustained impact on fertility rates. They violate reproductive rights, and they are typically not evidence-based. They are based on kind of normative thinking that one size fits all. And in this, I really like Apurva's kind of emphasis on differences in population groups and their needs and their kind of perceptions of and plans. And also Ayman mentioning migrants as a special group. So I think when I put all these pieces of puzzle together, we need more evidence in many countries on social status and gender inequalities in reproductive plans, choices, and obstacles which young people are facing. And that includes the better evidence on unplanned reproduction, differences in partnership and parenthoods, and what choices young people have, especially those which are from lower social status or specific minorities. We often think that men are kind of privileged group, but increasingly due to higher education performance among women, young men, especially with lower social status, are increasingly marginalized also on partnership markets and marriage markets, which has consequences for reproduction and for their future ways of realizing their reproductive plans. So thinking also of all the innovative features of the DHS surveys and other data, Apurva again mentioned looking at new ways of asking about the impact of technologies, the impact of social media. There are many things we don't know, and zooming on young people and their lives and preferences and their constraints would be very useful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reinforcing the points that Apurva and Ayman also mentioned in how we need to reframe our own ways of understanding population dynamics and how young people specifically are responding to some of these anxieties. Lastly, Zori, a minute for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, I have 3 recommendations. The first one that I noticed that there's a deficit of demographers worldwide nowadays. So paying more attention to training of young scholars in the field of demography is needed. You know, when I was young, I studied at Cairo Demographic Center when it was sponsored by UNFPA. So I need to see a new generation of demographers and population specialists. This is one. The second thing that you need actually to pay more attention to demographic resilience and how to help countries develop their plans for the future. The last recommendation that I also urge you to work more on in the field of migration, replacement migration, and population dynamics in general. That's all. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful, excellent, excellent. Thanks for highlighting the importance of increasing our, capacity, particularly given all the challenges that we are facing now. I know that we have limited time. We have only 10 minutes for many questions. Let me see what my colleagues have highlighted for me to focus on. Do we have any?
There are still no questions in chat, Priscilla.
No questions on the chat. So everything was so wonderful. We have hands up. Okay. Yes, please. Let them talk, whoever. I can't see the hands up on my side. Whoever can see them. Okay, I see Elemai, then Neven, then Sad, and then Sobia, in that order. Over to you, Elemai, and be succinct and brief, please. We don't have much time.
Okay, it's my pleasure and honor to be with you today on this significant series of global conversations on ICPD 30. I'd like also to thank Dr. Ayman Zohri to give us this opportunity to share in these important conversations. I'd like to extend my appreciation to all speakers to their strategic proposals, ideas, and the questions. I have 2 questions indeed. The first question is in tackling developing and the African countries' main population and migration needs and the problems. What are the main priorities and the criteria followed by international organizations like UNFPA and USAID in selecting vulnerable categories and countries? And are these priorities and criteria changeable or fixed? This is my question. This is my first question. My second question, really to extend what Dr. Ayman Zohari proposed. What are, as long as there is a deficit of the demographers, what are the main roles in dealing with noticeable demographic and geopolitical changes and the challenges that are confronted in the Middle East area, Sudan, Libya, Syria? These demographic challenges and geopolitical problems can have an impact on restructuring population and migration problems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nevin. I'll take a few more and then turn back. But please,
I'm Dr.
please
Nevin, Professor of Political Sociology at Shams University. Thank you so much.
Thank
Priscilla.
you. Thank you, Saad. And please be
Hi.
brief.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much. This is Saad. I am UNV at UNFPA India. I'm just a follow-up question as the previous persons. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I have two questions, one from Mr. Ayman, which is very similar to the person who asked the question. With the geopolitical changes, especially to build demographic resilience, what would be Mr. Ayman's recommendation to especially organizations like UNFPA to be able to advocate with different governments of the world, especially for the migration policies, considering the geopolitical atmosphere that there is? And my second question is from Dr. Apurva Jadhav. They mentioned about USAID's upcoming work on data collection for persons with diverse sexual orientation. If there have been some recommendations that they want to share, what were some of the learnings in terms of, because I keep on researching about wanting population disaggregated data for especially persons of diverse sexual orientation, but there are very less, as we can agree. So some of the recommendations, those are my two questions. Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks, Priscilla.
Thank you, Saad. Sobia?
I'm Sobia Ali from Pakistan, and I'm representing my organization, the Young Change Makers. Thank you for organizing this great event for raising awareness on crucial topic on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of International Conference on Population and Development. I believe this session is essential for addressing the challenges and opportunities presented by the world's shifting demographic and their intersections with global migrants like rapid urbanization, technologies advancements, and the climate crisis. As a citizen of Karachi, one of the hottest cities in Pakistan, where temperatures are currently reaching 50 degrees C. According to today's news, more than 140 people have died due to heat wave, and I'm deeply concerned about the impact of climate change with high population density, exacerbating these challenges and the additional strain of frequent electricity shortage. My question is, what are the future plans to address climate emergencies in densely populated areas, and how can we ensure adequate infrastructure and resources to protect vulnerable communities from deadly effects of extreme heat? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Limia. Please be brief. Just ask the question because we don't have much time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Limia Abdel Ghaffar, Sudan Family Planning Association. I'll be brief. Number one, I would like to ask about how the UNFPA could take in its future planning the humanitarian and the conflict effect on demographic changes. You know, like Sudan now, we were entering the demographic dividend, but because of war now and conflict, there are complete, destruction of the infrastructure, people livelihood and everything. So we have high IDPs, high refugees. So we are losing, the demographic dividend. So how you are taking the conflict and its effect on demographic changes and demographic, and people mobility. The second question is related to the conversation between migration policies and population policies. We just need to make sure that there are, coherence between the two policies, especially in the North world, because it affects us in the South part of the world. The third question is related to climate change. Of course, climate change is affecting everything. It affects people livelihood. It leads to poverty. It leads to some of diseases. So climate change is connected with other, sectors like health or economic and social. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Walter, and the last one.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I want to underscore that despite decreasing fertility among women in reproductive age, some specific groups might be at higher risk of becoming pregnant, such as the little girls aged under 15, because of the secular declining trends in the age of first menstruation, the first ovulation. So in the context of sexual violence, which explains much of their fertility in this age group, the share of girls in risk might be higher, and in some countries such as Peru, the trends on this group in the fertility, even the fertility in this specific age group under 15, is increasing or not decreasing in the same trends as in the all women in reproductive age. Thanks.
Thank you. I think some were comments, others were questions. There were a few questions to Apuva, some questions to Zori, and general questions, and one to UNFPA. So Zori, if you would like to start, and Thomas, feel free to come in, at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good questions, but all are related to migration. I am demographer, and I work on migration as a demographer. I don't want to leave demography just for policies and just for other disciplines. We are the people who are supposed to produce data. We are supposed to give evidence of the population mobility, population change related to migration, to refuge, to conflict. So I believe that UNFPA need to work more on migration as one aspect of demography, and this, in fact, will help other agencies that work in the field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Apuva.
I think that there's documents online that may help in answering some of the questions. For the first question from Naveen, the Pathways document does include the indexes and the questions that we use to frame those indices in order to determine which countries would be prioritized. So I urge you to look at that. I think for Saad, there is a public-facing document. If you look up this collecting diverse data on gender and sexuality in DHS surveys and overview, it should give you what the recommendations have been. And I think for the last question about climate change and population, I actually encourage UNFPA to have a Let's Talk focused on exactly this, because clearly there's so much interest. I think the main focus should be that, as Tomas was saying, pronatalist policies don't work, neither do coercive policies. And so we have to make sure that rights are front and center in any of the policies that we choose to respond to the growing threat of climate change.
Thank you, Apuva. Thomas, any last reactions to some of the questions?
Since so much of the discussion is focused on migration, let me just flesh out a few quick things. I think migration is a minefield a little bit. it will definitely have a strong impact on demographic dynamics across the world for the rich countries, kind of helping them to deal with the accelerated aging and potentially declining population. For the middle income countries, kind of dealing with the aspirations of many young people which cannot be fulfilled in these countries, and for low income countries, especially those facing crises and governments issues, conflicts, of course, the willingness to migrate to a better place is always there. The big issue, of course, that's for another session, is the contrast between the global needs of following human rights principles and giving migrants protection, and the kind of very pragmatic approaches which I think many rich countries will apply in the future, deciding who can come and who can stay in the country based on some criteria which can be objective, empirical, but will not definitely fulfill the wishes and needs of many potential migrants.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you've really summarized it well, that the issues around migration, change from high income countries to middle income to low income, and therefore they should be taken in context, and how can we humanize, across the different contexts. So thank you. I think we have gone over time by 2 minutes. But it has been a pleasure to have this session, and I think it has highlighted very important issues around high fertility context, the drivers, and also the causes of the failures of some of those policies that have been put in place, and how we need to move forward, particularly in understanding the demographics and population dynamics that are driving some of these changes. But Apuva has really highlighted the importance of taking a very pragmatic approach to using evidence and data to drive our action, and demonstrated also by the choice of countries that the new strategy at USAID is focusing, which was evidence-driven and categorizing or tiering countries into different categories. We've heard about the new data collection efforts by the DHS, but also we've heard about some of the new areas that we need to focus on across, the 3 speakers. So we've heard about the migration being not politicized, but being a policy, something mainstreamed in the policies, and being taken as a human-centered approach to migration, and not seeing it as something that is unwelcome. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we shall be taking these conversations forward, and there are a number of things that have come up that we are not able to discuss, but this is not the end, this is only the beginning, and we shall be welcoming you again to more in-depth discussions on each of these topics, and Apuva has already suggested on climate change. So we shall probably be taking your words on that. So thank you very much, our esteemed speakers. Thank you, dear participants that were able to join us, and thanks colleagues that helped facilitate and organize this. Bye for now.